that says on air. Ready? Good morning, and welcome to the April 9th, 2019 Historic Site Preservation Board monthly meeting. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. Member Huff?
Yes.
Member Marsh? Vincent did call in and was excused. He does have, he's recovering from knee surgery. Member Kaiser?
Here.
Member Dixon?
Present.
Member Lavoie?
Here.
Vice Chair Hayes?
Here.
Member Burkett?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Excuse me. Does the board have any revisions to the agenda? Seeing none, may I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
So we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carry it.
We need to do the mention of the posting of the agenda.
Pardon?
I need to do the posting of the agenda.
The posting of the agenda?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just get that, and we'll get that done. So the agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of Council Chambers and at the Planning Department counter in accordance with applicable law.
Okay. Proceed. Okay. It's time for public comment. This time has been set aside for the members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. Members of the public who would like to comment on all other items other than those on the agenda are directed to comment under this portion of the agenda. So if we have any members of the audience, like any other items, seeing that there are none, we will move to the...
Mr. Chair, before you close the public comment session, I would just indicate that on items 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D, if anyone has comments, this would be the appropriate time to make those comments.
Okay. Anyone in the audience wishing to make comments? Seeing none,
Pull this closer.
we move to the consent.
Pull your microphone a little closer.
I'm sorry, I can't
Pull
hear
your
you.
microphone a little closer.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So moving into the consent calendar. The approval of the minutes, March 12th, 2019 HSPB meeting. Are there any revisions to the minutes of the March 12th meeting by the board? Any revisions, any changes? May I have a motion to?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. So now it's time to move into public hearings. Let's proceed, if you would please, to agenda item 2A, the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation requesting Class 1 Historic Resource Designation for Inspiration Point, AKA the Promontory. May I have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in your staff report, this is an application that's been brought in by the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. The owner is not participating in the nomination submission on this particular item. Thomas Arthur O'Donnell, who was a successful businessman in the oil industry and a long-term Palm Springs resident, initiated construction of Inspiration Point as a means of providing employment for workers in Palm Springs during the Great Depression. It's a visual legacy of O'Donnell, a significant figure in the history and development of Palm Springs. As you walk through your staff report, the location of Inspiration Point, as you'll see in the PowerPoint presentation that I'll go through briefly with you, is immediately above the O'Donnell Golf Course. This is the view that most of us would see from the valley floor of Inspiration Point. It's the large rock outcropping that is quite prominent from almost all parts of Palm Springs. To approach Inspiration Point, you find yourself on the north side of the Wellwood Murray Cemetery on Chino Road. There's a small access drive at the end of Chino Road that you'll see here. That access road aligns just adjacent to the surface yard for the O'Donnell Golf Course, which you see here. The rock wall that you see in the front of this particular image is part of the rock wall that is in the grounds area of the golf course maintenance area. The rock wall that you see behind, adjacent to the gate, is the rock wall that is on part of the roadway bed that leads up to Inspiration Point. Here again you see sort of an overview, and I'm going to step briefly up here and explain some of these characteristics that you're looking at. So this is Chino Drive. This is that entrance point that I just shared with you. This is the service drive or the roadway that actually leads up to Inspiration Point, which is here. Below Inspiration Point are a series of other lots and some roadways that have been entered into this part of the mountainside just below. But the item that we're looking at here is the roadway up to Inspiration Point. Inspiration Point is on a parcel of land that's approximately 30 acres. There's a small segment of land here that is the parcel on which the service drive is located. As those of you that made the site visit up to Inspiration Point, the rock wall that is part of this access road has collapsed due to most likely heavy rains that have saturated the soil and pushed the rock away just due to the heavy pressure of the water in the soil. Here you see another view of that roadway. Most of the wall is still intact, but there are portions that have collapsed. When you're on the roadway, this is the way it looks as you're heading up to Inspiration Point. With the Valentine's Day rains, they had some significant erosion on this roadway. This is the overall platform. It's approximately a 3/4 of an acre plateau that was created with the construction of Inspiration Point. There you can also see roughly the way that the mountainside was cut away just above the flat portion of Inspiration Point, and that's where most of the rock came from for the construction of the wall. This is viewing on top of it looking toward the north. And here you have a detail of how those arched openings in the rock is actually formed along the top of that rock railing. At the top of Inspiration Point, which is also mentioned in your staff report, is this large pointed arched opening. This particular opening is part of the construction of Inspiration Point. It's not exactly clear, as you read in the nomination report, what this was built for. There's some conjecture that O'Donnell built it as a place to be interned upon his death, but there is no evidence that that was actually its intent, and it is simply right now vacant. It has had some vandalism. As you can see there, the opening has been sealed, but there have been people that have broken into it. This is a view inside of that opening. There's approximately a 35-foot tunnel that leads back into a room that's roughly 15 feet square. Back up on top of the Inspiration Point, this gives you an impression of the scale of this wall. It's really hard to imagine until you're really up there looking over the edge of it, but it's an enormous, enormous piece of workmanship. As you're heading up the road from that lower road that I showed you, this is the actual upper part of the road as it enters and turns around the corner to get onto the actual plateau. And maybe the end of my slides, I guess. Yeah. So going back into the staff report, the evaluation of this particular site against the criteria in the city's ordinance begins on your staff report, page 4. And it's identified that it was, Inspiration Point is qualified as a historic site under many of the different categories that you see here, including being associated with events, lives of persons, that is Thomas O'Donnell, the period in time, which was the Great Depression, in which O'Donnell's philanthropic activity to help workers in the Palm Springs area was the genesis for the project. As noted on page 6 of your report, It is also, person of significance involved with this is John Klein. John Klein was a trusted friend of O'Donnell and was placed in charge of the entire effort of supervising the construction of Inspiration Point. At any one time, Klein was using roughly between 20 and 25 men, supervising them and overseeing the overall construction of the project. I'm sorry, on page 7 of your staff report, then we've gone into an analysis of the integrity. As you know, there are 7 qualities of integrity which are outlined in your staff report, including location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, and feeling. And we have found in our review of the project that it characterizes most of those qualities of integrity. On page 9 of your staff report, we've identified what we believe are the character-defining features of this project. It includes the rock wall, it includes the arched entry and the subterranean room that is cut into the mountainside itself. We've also identified on page 9 those items which we believe do not contribute to the historic significance of the site. Those would be the road bed, the security gates at the entrance to the access road. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. On the bottom of page 9 and onto the top of page 10, it's important to understand both, and this is also identified in your nomination report, this is an area that is viewed by the current owner as developable. The owner has the ownership of this parcel as well as the several parcels that are immediately downslope from Inspiration Point. And although they have no application in at this time, their desire is at some point in the future to consider development. In light of that, there are some conversations which I've had with the applicant that I want to share with you with regard to potential improvements that would be necessary. If this area on the top of Promontory Point were to be built upon, the fire department will need to have emergency access for fire department equipment. That's going to require significant re-engineering of the road bed. In order to do so, most of the rock wall that you saw in those lower photos is likely going to have to be removed, and I'll show you these areas again specifically. So beginning here at this point at the very bottom of the road bed, or the roadway, that road leads all the way up, as you can see, and the area that we are talking about that may need, or that would need improvement if the site is developed, is that entire road bed, including these portions where you see the roadway has collapsed. In addition, on the issue of those areas that are non-contributing, we would also point out that our recommendation is that the platform itself, or the flat part that is created by the rock wall of Promontory Point, is we would not characterize as a historic feature. We would characterize it such that if the developer or owner wanted to do some type of development on that plateau at some time in the future, that they would be allowed to do so. So the issues that are in addition to what I have identified in the staff report is that the plateau itself, we would want to make such that the owner would have the opportunity in the future to develop it if they wish to do so. As with any Class 1 historic site, if this were to get that type of designation, a development application that would go on that site would be reviewed by the HSPB. The second issue that the owner discussed with us is a request that if the site is recommended today for a city council designation, they would request that this lower portion of the wall along the roadbed be exempted from the character-defining features. And the reason for that is the road is going to need to be improved, and with the collapse that we've seen here, it's lost much of its historic integrity already. And the owner would want the opportunity to be able to rebuild that roadbed and would need to widen it in order to get the fire trucks and the apparatus to the top surface. There is a person here who is representing the owner, who can also speak more to that if you've got further questions on it. So basically, in our staff report, we are recommending that this site does qualify as a potential historic resource, and that would be our recommendation to the board. with the conditions that I just outlined. So I'm available to answer any questions. This is a public hearing item. The applicant who wrote the report that are representing Palm Springs Preservation Foundation are here in the audience. The person representing the property owner is also in the audience, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Board, are there questions of staff?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ken, what is the width of the roadbed right now?
I would say it's approximately 18 feet.
Okay. So how much of the wall would have to be rebuilt to make fire truck access?
They haven't, let me go to the overall aerial that shows these roads. They have not actually had engineering surveys out to fully engineer and survey that road. But most of it, as you remember from walking on it, is pretty narrow. So I'm going with the assumption, and I'm going to step up to the screen here a minute. I'm going with the assumption that basically from this point, which is the terminus of the property, all the way up to here, they're going to need to make this road wider and increase its load-bearing capacity. So when you look at this rock wall, this is where the portion has collapsed. These are the portions that they're saying they would like to see exempted so they can actually achieve the roadway improvement. There are no rock walls along this portion of it. This is simply the natural embankment until you get to about here, and then you can see here the rock does continue. This area of rock they're not proposing would be exempted. This would be part of the nomination of this portion of the wall. It's really this portion in here. And when you look at your nomination report as well as the staff report, you'll note that there's a very narrow parcel of land here that comprises this road. This parcel of land is 30 feet wide. So they've got to get this roadbed into that parcel of land in order to do the improvements that they would do in the future.
And the length of that driveway? Ken, the length of that driveway?
The overall length of the road from the bottom to the top is about 2,100 feet, but from the portion at the end of Chino Drive up to roughly where the road splits is probably about 800 feet.
So if the driveway was made wide enough for a fire truck, any development would have to accommodate a fire truck turning around at the top of the driveway,
Yes.
which is a 100-foot radius?
Well, there's various configurations that the fire department works with. They can either do a cul-de-sac type or a hammerhead. In most cases like this, where there's limited square footage on the land, they'll do a hammerhead turn.
That's all my questions.
Linda?
Ken? So what would happen if that one part was exempt? What would happen to the road, the remaining piece of road to the flatbed? How would they go about improving it for fire truck access?
Well, the entire road up to the promontory would need to be improved for fire truck access all the way to the top.
Right.
So the portions, when you look at the overall road improvements, and again, we don't have a specific scope, but from the end of Chino Drive up to the promontory, that entire road would need to be improved, widened, and have its load-bearing capacity increased
And they would have to cut into the mountain.
as well, most
That's
likely.
the only way they could expand it.
They would probably cut portions into the mountain, and they would probably also bring more of the fill onto the outer side of the mountain as well. So the concern for the applicant is you're probably going to push an additional width to the road into the mountain as well as cut and fill some onto the outer side.
And the roadway below, that is all part of this application, correct? All the little roads, all
No.
the way down to the golf course?
No, only the road that leads up to Inspiration Point. The roads that you see, the roads that you see in here are on separate parcels that are not a part of this application.
Okay. So those parcels can't be developed without,
These parcels would at least need this much road improvement to here to get them into here as well. And then whatever happens in here, if this was the farthest point of a buildable lot, whatever roads would be out to here would need to bring that load-bearing capacity for the fire trucks.
Has the fire department looked at this piece of property? And have they given us any opinions?
Other than they expect there to be access provided for their apparatus. So they've not necessarily looked at what needs to be done to engineer all these points, but their concept, or their communication with the applicant is development of these areas requires access for the city services.
And development on this property was approved back when?
There's no current development that's approved on this project.
So this parcel has never been considered for any type of development aside from the fact that O'Donnell at one time said he was going to build a house?
That's correct. You've got, when you look on the land in those lower portions, that's comprised of about 4 lots.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have for right now. Thank you.
Lori?
Tim, one additional one. So on the subject, about midway up the driveway, there's a turnout, it looks like. Is that another potential lot? About midway beyond the turnoff, the first turnoff, that right there, what's that?
It's kind of a spur that goes down into here. I don't know if I have it in your staff report or not, but I don't remember the exact configuration of lots in here, but this may come down to a buildable lot in this area. I'm not certain.
I see. Okay.
It's a very irregular shaped set of lots in here, and I don't remember the exact configuration.
Thank you.
So I'm not hearing any real, the designation causing any hindrance to them at some point wanting to build on the lot in the future, other than that lower portion of the wall. If that's included in the designation, that might cause a problem, but the rest of it isn't going to prevent them from building on the lot, correct?
Right, that's correct. They would want the ability to potentially build on the actual promontory that's been created by the upper wall, and then, of course, to be able to build on the adjacent lots that are not a part of this particular application.
So, but if that flat pad that you said is not part of the designation, or it's not part of the, it's not a contributing part of the
That's
designation?
correct.
So if that's the case, they would be allowed to build on it?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Any other comments? Okay.
Questions?
I have one. Does the owner support this designation?
The owner, I'm going to let the owner speak for themselves, because I think there's a person here representing the owner. My conversations with them yesterday were that they were concerned about these issues of the ability to do the roadway in the future. And I believe that they will speak to that issue as to whether or not they're comfortable at this point lending their support to the application.
I have one other question.
Linda?
Does the city of Palm Springs have any ordinances that don't allow building on mountainsides at a certain level?
The zoning code prohibits the building on slopes greater than 30%. And when you look at a particular lot that may have portions of it on which the slopes are greater than 30%, those portions are not counted toward the buildable area of the lot when doing the calculus of lot coverage.
That's a lot to absorb.
The
Could you
short
say
answer-
that again?
The short answer is portions of the mountainside that are greater than 30% in slope are not buildable in general. So those areas where the slope is greater than 30% are not buildable.
Okay, so does that mean that we could be building up our mountainside in the future? I mean, what percentage of our mountains surrounding Palm Springs are less than 30%?
I don't know, but there are different areas along the mountainside where there have been, in the past, subdivisions that have been approved by the city council. So there are some subdivisions along the southern part of the mountains, and there's a couple of areas along the western mountain slopes where there are subdivisions that have been created and lots of record that have been created.
Thank you.
Okay. I believe that the applicant is present with us today. If you please come to the mic, give your name and address, and tell us about your project. You have 10 minutes to present and 2 minutes for rebuttal if desired after any public comments. So,
Thank you.
welcome.
My name is Jan Harper, and I'm a board member of the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. And we wanted you to know today that we enthusiastically support this nomination. This nomination was written for us by Steve Vaught, who has written many other books on Palm Springs history. And Steve is in the audience today with us, right here. And he is the one that could really answer or address any questions because he is the one who wrote this designation. So I'm basically here today to ask you to, or hopefully ask you to support this nomination to go forward to the City Council. Questions?
First of all, are there any, we'll come back to that in just a minute, any public comments from the audience? So then, I think, yes, we now will ask,
The applicant needs to come forward.
pardon?
The applicant needs to come forward.
Yeah.
He's in support.
Oh, I thought we had the applicant.
I am
here.
the
I'm
applicant
So sorry.
from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. Steve Vaught wrote the nomination for us, and he is here. We have one other speaker who is here to offer their support for this nomination. I don't know if you want this now or later, after the other person has spoken.
I think the confusion is the applicant is not the owner.
Correct.
Did we want to hear from the owner first and then public comment after?
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
all good? Okay, so, oh, we have one more. Yes, please. The owner first?
Yes, I'm here for the owner of the property. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Scott Lyle, and I'm here on behalf of the owner of the property, which is Old Las Palmas Point LLC, and they could not be here this morning. First and foremost, to answer your question, the owner wants to support this historical designation. This is the owner's message to you that I'm reading. Considering the cost associated with removing and replacing the historic roadway retaining wall would be more than the value of the land, we would request the entire roadway wall be exempted as a condition for our support on the retaining wall that's surrounding the promontory flat building pad and the arched rock to the subterranean room. Also, please note that the building pad should also be exempted, as Ken discussed, and a small portion of the perimeter wall on the north side that may need to be removed for fire apparatus turnaround, to answer your question. It is important that we balance historical preservation with safety. On a personal note, I have been associated with this property for 30 years. I'm a real estate broker and I've sold it twice. I've sat in many due diligence meetings with people that are at this table. And it is the wall that surrounds the promontory pad that you see from many vantage points within the city. It is the wall that surrounds the pad that is significant. By preserving the promontory wall, you have protected what is truly significant. Anything more will result in the property being unusable for its entitled use. Thank you for your consideration.
Did you sign it?
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
The part that you mentioned, you said a portion of the north wall near the promontory they would like exempted also?
Yes. So the owner sent, I think if you haven't, we'll send it to you, a small exhibit. Can I just show you up here?
Yeah, here.
Okay.
Hold on.
And by the way, we've met with the fire marshal on this property before the property was purchased and discussed this. There's a lot of issues with getting safety up to the property. not only the width, when you think how big a fire truck is, but the weight. The weight of the truck exceeds 75,000 pounds. So you have to engineer a pretty good road. At this point, when you come up to it, right here is where the turnaround would be. It's just a small portion, not visible really from most of the city, but this small portion would be the fire truck could actually turn around and come down.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? The applicant? Or if not?
Now, public comment.
Yeah, any public comments? Any other public comments? We do have one. Yes, please come forward. Give us your name and your address.
I got bad knees, sorry. Good morning. My name is Charles Brobeck. I'm a vice president and a member of the board of directors for the O'Donnell Golf Club. And our board, as well as our members, enthusiastically support this nomination. We would appreciate your support in giving a positive recommendation for the designation of this promontory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the audience that would like to speak? Please come forward.
Hi, I'm Steve Vaught, and I'm with the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, and I was the one who did the actual nomination application for it. And I just wanted to come up and introduce myself in case anyone had any questions. But I have been a historian for some time and have been fascinated by this particular parcel, among others, because it's one of the rarest pieces of history here from an era that we have very little from, the era of the Great Depression. It was a world economic disaster, and this is actual physical proof of one man's efforts to try and help. And the Native American and the Mexican American population here were given jobs specifically. This was what this project was intended to be. It is a living testament to Tom O'Donnell, who was really one of the foremost people ever in the history of Palm Springs. He has to be one of the top 5. And he had no actual, as far as we know, he never actually spoke about why he did it, other than to say that he was giving work. We don't know that he was planning on building a house here. That's just been an assumption that we've made, since he never once said anything to anybody directly or to friends who have come out later as to what he actually planned on doing with it. The house he did build was down below at the O'Donnell Golf Course, which is now their clubhouse. And so I think it's very important, not only because it's such a rare and important piece of Great Depression work, because when you look around the country, they've been preserving things that were created by, say, the WPA and other places. We don't have anything like that in Palm Springs other than this. And plus the connection to the Native American population and the Mexican American population that worked on it at a time that otherwise they might have starved is there. And so I just think it's critical to preserve it in some form here so that it will always remain a testament to that part of our history. And, yes, sir.
Yes, Bill.
Would you talk to me about the potential impacts of not preserving the flat space? You know, the scenario that someone with substantial means is going to build a house, let's say, of the quality of the Bob Hope House on this site.
Well, from a layman's standpoint, I can only give my own opinion as to what I would think. But since it's so visible, it is considered the most looked at place in Palm Springs. It's been called that a number of times. In fact, I think I mentioned in the nomination that the Palm Springs Chamber of Commerce gets more questions. Oh, it's one of their top questions that people ask tourists as to what is that up there. And so I think that, you know, whatever is built up there would obviously need to be sensitive to the visual of the landscape because it is so visual. I know through my studies that there have been several times that people have attempted through the decades to build on the mountainsides. In fact, a roadway was intended to go from Ramon Road all the way across and above up there in the 1930s that was going to be ringed with houses so that you'd have sort of a Hollywood Hills thing. It would have changed the entire look of Palm Springs. And so I think from a personal standpoint, my concern is that, you know, if something is built up there, that it remains sensitive. I will want to point out in regards to that is that Tom O'Donnell also built something very similar back in the 1920s and 1925 with the Ojo del Desierto, the Tom O'Donnell house, using the same construction methods that he did for this. And in our research on Mr. O'Donnell was an early environmentalist and was greatly concerned with the appearance of not wanting to scar the mountain in any way, shape, or form. It is considered sacred to the Cahuillas, and felt that it would be a violation of that. And so the way in which the roadway was built, the way in which the pad itself was built, was purposefully intended to blend in. And so I would think that to honor Mr. O'Donnell's legacy and also to the people of Palm Springs, that whatever is done there with the road, and it sounds like it does need to have something done with it, that it is sensitive to the visual of what, you know, making sure that from a distance that it doesn't look like a big scar in the side of the mountain. You're welcome.
Any other questions? No?
I'm going in the same direction.
So it's a ditto for you, right? Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaught. Okay, so this concludes our public comment on this item. And I ask the board, it's now time to discuss the merits of the case. So one thing I'd like to interject here before we start is based on protocol that's being used by other city boards, I'd like to go around the table in the order in which you are seated. So I think this will make for a smoother discussion as we go forward. So I'd like to start with Ms. Dixon. Any comments or discussions that you would like to bring up about the case?
Not at this point. I'd like to hear what my other board members have to say. Mr. Hayes.
So I have a question for staff. In the future, with respect to that flat pad at the promontory, any design that was proposed would come back before this board, wouldn't it? Because it's still part of that site.
If it becomes a Class 1 site, yes.
Okay. So we would have some say over what actually gets built on that flat pad.
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Lavoie.
I think the flat area needs to be part of the designation and one of the character defining features. This is an historic open space. We're used to looking up at the mountain and seeing this flat pad, not looking up at some large house. Getting a fire truck up this hill is not something I'd like to have the headache I would like to have in my life. I've done it before, and half of this wall is going to have to come down in order to accommodate the fire trucks. There also has to be, with a driveway this long, there has to be at least 1 or 2 turnouts so that a car coming down the hill from the house doesn't block the driveway for the fire truck going up. You know, it's not exactly a high fire hazard area, but still it has to be accommodated. I would propose that from the turnout, the lower turnout that goes to the potential lots, from that turnout to the driveway gate, that wall and that driveway could be modified so as to not prevent development of the lower lot, but from that turnout to the promontory not be altered, and from there up, that part, and from there up, any restoration of the wall would be according to the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Kaiser.
I think we do need to allow the lots to be buildable. And I think what the owner is requesting is very minimal to put into this nomination. I support the nomination because it's something that would give this board a chance to approve what would be built there. And I think that that's the most important thing, but I do think that it does need to be allowed to be buildable.
Ms. Hutt.
I also support the nomination. The Inspiration Point, the wall, the vertical wall, is significant because it was like the first public-private work project during that Depression, as so described. And that's significant and very important to the history of Palm Springs. So I would support that.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Dixon, any further comment?
I cannot see any building on that flatbed. I just, it is such a significant part of our city that I can't even envision a house, no matter how it comes to this board and whatever kind of approval, it doesn't seem appropriate. As far as the lower lots, I'm saddened to learn that they're not part of the application because I think that the whole visual there is absolutely beautiful. I think the wall is a great history of our city, and to hear that sections of it would be taken away, or that our mountainside would be cut into so we could have a road for fire trucks of 75,000 pounds, doesn't seem appropriate to me.
Okay. This is a difficult one.
I'll attempt a motion.
Pardon? Yes?
I'll attempt a motion.
Okay.
To accept the report and to make the recommendation to the City Council to designate this as a Class 1 historic site with the following changes to the documents. That the flat area at the promontory be included as a character-defining feature. That the driveway from the first turnaround to the promontory be also included in the designation as a character-defining feature, and any restoration be undertaken as a restoration according to the Secretary of the Interior standards. That below the first turnaround to the gate be allowed to be modified to accommodate emergency and vehicular access to the potential sites below it.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
No, under discussion.
Discussion.
Pardon?
Under discussion next.
Yes. In our discussion today, we have a first and a second.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, what you'll want to do at this point, you've accepted the first and the second, so you want to open it up for any further discussion before you call the vote.
Okay. Any further discussion? Todd? Go ahead.
So, with respect to the addition, and I guess this is a staff question, with the addition of the flat pad being a contributing part, that still would not prohibit it from being built on in the future, would just make it more difficult? Question?
I was just going to go ahead and say, in our historic preservation ordinance, if it becomes a Class 1 designated site, then any major alteration of that site would be subject to the criteria that we have here in our historic preservation ordinance. So what we would look at is, does it impact the character-defining features? So there would still be an ability to file an application, but we would have to evaluate it based on the impacts to the character-defining features of the historic resource.
So to build upon that, if the board makes a recommendation that it's the, I think characterizing Mr. Lavoie's motion, that the promontory wall itself and that the wall from the promontory down to the first V would be handled as contributing features, and the platform that's created by the promontory wall would be a contributing feature as well. So if there were to be an application that came in proposing a structure on that open pad, and the open pad is a defining characteristic, then the board would need to resolve itself on how does a house going on this defined characteristic, which is open space, which would no longer be open space, how that would be resolved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
It gets complicated. Yes. Any other board discussion on the items? So we have a first and a second the motion. So I'd like to, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
2. So we have a vote of 5 in favor and 2 opposed.
May I see a show of hands for ayes? Because I didn't catch them. Linda, Bill, Dan. So I have 3 ayes?
No.
4.
No, 5.
What?
Okay.
Dan, where are you?
Here.
Okay.
4. Okay, got it.
Got
So
it?
the motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you. So, moving right on to the next public hearing. Item 2B on your agenda. Again, we have...
Mr. Chair, would you please speak into your microphone?
Yes, sorry. The Palm Springs Preservation Foundation has brought to us requesting Class 1 Historic Resource designation of the Avery Field Cabin ruins. May I have a staff report, please?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in your staff report, this is an application by the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation recommending Class 1 Historic Site designation for the property on which the Avery Field Cabin ruins is located. This is at the western terminus of Santa Rosa Drive, and it's in the southern area of the tennis club neighborhood. As noted in your staff report, Avery Field was a nationally known photographer who was in Palm Springs during the early 1920s. He and a number of other artist types had settled on these lower portions of the hillside on land that was owned by I'm going to draw a complete blank, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. By Pearl McManus, sorry. This group of individuals is noteworthy because each of them were different types of artisans in their own craft, writers, photographers, painters, and they all settled in a rather haphazard way in this area and created what would be basically called a loosely knit community. Later, this little group of artisans was referred to as the Creative Brotherhood. And as noted in your staff report and in the nomination report, they were accredited for really bringing an awareness to the natural beauty of Palm Springs to much of the outside part of the United States and even other parts of the world. On page 3 of your staff report is a parcel that shows the overall location of the field cabin ruins. And you can see in that particular exhibit, this parcel is bisected by a portion of the Barista Wash. There are, there's the analysis on the evaluation of this particular project against the ordinance begins on your staff report, page 6, and continues through page 7 and 8 with an analysis of the issues of integrity beginning on page 8. I want to jump ahead for just a moment and understand what we've put forward as a suggestion on the character-defining features here. This is unusual in the sense that you've normally looked at structures and objects that are intact. And you're looking here for the first time, I think this is the first time this board has considered actually an application that involves ruins. But the items that we've recommended as character defining in this case are the rock fireplace, the rock and the poured concrete knee walls, the concrete floor, the stone steps that lead up to it. And I'm going to move through some of these slides just very quickly for you. On this first exhibit, what you're seeing on the left is the photograph of the cabin when it was existing. The middle exhibit is as it exists today, and the photo on the right is Avery Field. So when you approach the western terminus of Santa Rosa Drive, it goes into a dirt road here. If you look in the very middle of this slide, you can just barely make out the fireplace right above that large brown rock. These are the steps as they exist today that lead up to the cabin ruins. And as you approach the top of those steps, this is the site that you see of the low knee wall and the remnant of the fireplace. This is a close-up as you walk onto that site. That's the portion that would be basically the southeast corner of what had been the cabin. This is a portion of the southerly wall of the cabin. You can see it's stone that was laid up in a poured concrete wall so that the inner surface of the wall is actually the poured concrete surface. There's the image of the fireplace and the stack that's still left over from the top of it, and the low knee wall adjacent to it. This is a portion of the southern area there. You can see the board formed concrete on the back side of the knee wall. That door that you see there, or that opening, would have led down to what we believe was where the Tockwitz Ditch previously ran. This is a view of the ruins looking to the south. You can see the adjacent development on the adjacent lots in this residential neighborhood. This is an image from the Historic Resources report showing the Tockwitz Ditch. This ditch is, according to the report, is a water irrigation channel that was begun as early as the 1830s by members of the Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indians, and it became a vital source of water for the early development of Palm Springs in the 1880s. This is from a Historic Resources report that was done last year when this particular parcel was under consideration for a parcel subdivision. So there is in this report dimension drawings of the cabin in its current state. And I believe that's the last of my images. So let me just get back to this a second. So as you look at this particular application, I want to draw your attention then to page 10. And I've included in your application materials here not only the Historic Resources report, but there was a report that I found online talking about, it's titled Preservation Without Restoration, the Case for Ruins. And it's an item that was authored as part of a master's thesis project by Roger Williams University in 2011. It's not written about this specific site, but it takes into account a fairly interesting discussion about what is the proper method for preserving ruins. And the discussion really goes into the point that you're looking at, you are not looking at a historic resource as it existed during its time of significance. You're looking at ruins and what is the appropriate manner of dealing with these ruins if it were to become a recognized historic site. Does it get preserved in its current state? If a future owner wanted to come along and do some kind of reconstruction, what would be appropriate? And in the report, it basically goes in and talks about the term, they use the term arrested decay. In other words, the project and the structure has been allowed to naturally disintegrate until it's at its point that you are considering it today. What is the appropriate treatment going forward, and the responsibilities that a property owner would have if this particular item was to become a historic resource? Is it allowed to continue decay naturally? Is it allowed, and is it then held in this sort of arrested state of decay so that it is actually able to continue to tell the story that you see today? That's part of what's going to be important to consider on this in any recommendation that you make to the City Council. When you look at a site that has a historic resource on it, as you know, it's eligible for the potential a potential Mills Act Property Preservation Agreement, or a Mills Act contract. The idea of a Mills Act contract is that in exchange for the additional burden that one carries when you have a historic property and the cost of maintaining it, the state of California has arranged that property taxes can be reduced, giving the property owner a financial benefit on their property taxes, recognizing that they've got an added financial burden of maintaining a historic resource. So that question begins to get called into point when you're looking at a ruin. If this does go forward with a potential Mills Act contract on it, what is to be maintained? What is the state at which the maintenance should be required? So we don't have to get into Mills Act contract issues today, but they're ones that if this were to become a historic site, I think it's important that the board identify what it believes is the appropriate measurement and maintenance of a site that is in ruins. So with that, that concludes my staff report. We are recommending Class 1 historic site designation for this parcel. The applicant is in the audience and can speak to the application further. And there is an individual in the audience representing the property owner who would also like to speak. That concludes my staff report.
Board, comments for staff?
I have a question. Ken, in that we're designating the entire site, there does seem to be potential for future development of the site of whatever scale that would or would not necessarily impact the resource or in our understanding of the resource. By designating the entire site, so any development in the future would come back to us?
Yes.
Would that designation prevent any development on the site?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
To Ken, when we visited the site, I thought I saw a window frame, metal window frame in the bushes. In regard to preservation, conservation, what would happen with that detached part of that structure?
When we looked at that as we were analyzing this, we were not able to verify that those metal frames were actually window frames. At one point I was looking at it, the second visit, they looked like it might have been an old bed frame. We did not include it in our recommendations for those components that would be quote-unquote character defining. They're loose. We don't know really that they are an integral part of the cabin, or they may have just been junk that may have been tossed there. So we did not include it in our recommendation to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Which brings up another question. I've never read one in Palm Springs, but could there be an archaeology report for the site? There must have been a trash pit somewhere that people tend to fill with all kinds of wonderful things. Junk to them, treasures to us. that reveal quite a bit about who was there and when they were there.
There was, as part of the development proposal or the subdivision proposal last year, there was a historic resources report, but I did not see anything that was an actual archaeological report or an archaeological investigation.
Sounds like a great project for some local college.
Board, any other comments to staff, questions to staff? None, seeing none. I believe the applicant is in the audience.
You want to open the public hearing
So I'm going to open the public hearing.
and then invite the applicant up.
And I understand the applicant is here, so would you please come forward to the mic, give your name and address, and tell us about your project. Again, you have 10 minutes to present and 2 minutes for a rebuttal, if desired, after any public comments.
Thank you. Jan Harper, member of the board of the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. We, as an organization, of course, enthusiastically support this project. This project, the nomination was written by Steve, who just spoke to you about the promontory, and is here to answer all questions that you might have. But we ask that you approve this project to go on to the City Council for their approval. Thanks. Do you want Steve to come up now?
Yes, I think that's be a good plan. Mr. Vaught, if you'd come to the mic, please. State your name, address.
Hi, I'm Steve Vaught again. And I'm currently living in Riverside. Do you need the actual street address? Okay, at this point. I didn't know this was coming up today. I'm very excited that it is. This is an amazing piece of Palm Springs history because it is one of the only pre-World War I sites when Palm Springs was first getting its start with that. We have so few of these. They almost are non-existent. And it should be preserved not just because it's old, but because it is significant in terms of the history of Palm Springs. Because Avery Edwin Field, who was a nationally known photographer, was part of a network that we call the Creative Brotherhood, or Peter Wildhead, with that. Because there is a network, or was a network, of little cabins, mostly squatters, who had taken over Pearl McManus's land. And amazingly, because Pearl loved artists, she didn't really object to these people doing this, which would have been kind of unusual for her, who was such a great business person. But so this developed this little place called the Creative Brotherhood, and Avery Field was a later member of that. And when his cabin was built, most of these were little tar paper shacks, but the Avery Field cabin was actually, as you can see even by the ruins, very well done. It was professionally done with that. It's quite charming. It's almost with its semi curved roof. With that, it was meant to last at that point. And although over the years it has fallen into ruins, the stone part has remained pretty much intact. There was, of course, I'm blanking. Is Edmund Yeager, who was also one of the Creative Brotherhood, who built a cabin behind what's now the tennis club. He had visited there when he was just a young teacher with this, and talked about all of the people who came there, including Carl Idle, who would sit there nearby and sketch with this. But he had mentioned in an article in the 1950s that the cabin was already in ruins by 1950. And so when we look at it today, it's close to looking as it did through the decades. So unmolested by any outside forces, the cabin ruins as we see them are pretty consistent. As I'm sure you saw during your site visit how solid they really are. And this is just, when you stand up there, you get a sense of what it must have been like to be in Palm Springs back in that period when there was nothing out and there. And it's just an opportunity for people to be able to see a piece of this early date. These people did make Palm Springs. Jimmy Swinnerton and Carl Idle and J. Smeaton Chase, who were the Creative Brotherhood, really put Palm Springs on the map. And we have nothing left of anything like J. Smeaton Chase. And this is a great resource. I personally would say that I would not think it would be unfair to allow the developer to build on that property, but just give it enough space to where the piece could remain, so that it's not something up against it with that. There is another little bit of a cabin ruin above it that we don't know what it's for. I didn't mention that in the report because it's up on the hill. There's lots of little mysteries around that area there that you can still discover for crazy people like me who go wandering up it. So in August, which you may find me up there one day. But anyway, I'm happy to, if anybody has any questions about what all I've been rambling about, I'd be happy to answer.
Board, any?
Sure.
Yes.
Could you speculate on the source of his building materials?
I think they were local. At least the stone parts were.
Well, the stone, but the wood parts.
The wood parts he might have had to bring in because if you look at it, it really looks very high quality. In fact, there's an atelier window there, and We even found, amazingly, a color photograph of it from 1922 that was taken by Fred Clatworthy. Now, the Clatworthy house, he wasn't internationally known. Field was famous, but Clatworthy was really famous. And he was supposedly the first person who had color photographs in National Geographic. He lived in that cabin sometime about 1921, 1922, while his little cabin across the way, which he'd bought some old miner's shack, he called it, in 1920. And he and his family used it as their winter home. They later built a bigger house called the Faraway Lodge, which is still there at 700 Ramon. And these houses used to look across at each other. But the material was, it kind of looks like it was redwood. And so I have the feeling he brought it in. Field was from Riverside, and he was doing so much photography that he decided, in the area, that he decided to have a little cabin there as well. And he used it for his photographic studio as well as his own residence during that time. But it really looks as if this stuff was brought in from somewhere else, because all the other cabins, it's quite famously known that they were all just literally just cobbled together from old shacks and other things left over from the collapse of the boom of the original boom of Palm Springs. And this one was quite elegant by comparison to it. It was really quite nice.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thanks, Dick.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Now that the public hearing is,
No, you want to ask the property owner to come forward.
oh, I'm so sorry. I thought we had the, please come forward.
Good morning. My name is Jim Franklin. I'm a real estate broker with Berkshire Hathaway. I'm here to represent John and Janet Beardsley, the owners of the property. We currently have it listed. I'm not going to say it's overpriced, but it may be. But anyhow, they fully support this project, and they're 100% behind it. I just have one question of staff. I just want to be clear on this, that they can restrict access to this. So if we put a fence, we're not going to build a wall, but something to keep people from going up there. We don't have to allow public access to it.
No, this is considered private property, so it can be handled as private property as such, yes.
Okay, we just want to be clear because there's so many people, and some of you have been up there. You know, I got scared trying to climb up that, and we just don't want people up there, and then you have graffiti, and I'm surprised it's stayed this way. But through the Mills contract and that, obviously there's a financial incentive, and that money will be used to secure it and make sure that it stays where it's at today. So we fully support the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board, any questions from the applicant?
I have a question. Since it's private property, and if it's designated as a historic site, where would a marker be located to identify this so that it was viewable by the public?
Markers are always placed somewhere adjacent to the public right-of-way. So that if one wants to read the marker, they don't have to go onto private property in order to read it.
So like at the end of the street or
Correct.
something like that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
No? Yes.
if you see no other speakers wanting to speak for public comment, then you can close the public comment period.
Okay. I think it's time to, I do not see any speakers. I'm going to close the. Are there any other speakers? I thought there was.
Seeing none, then I will close the public
That's what I
hearing.
was going to say. Okay. Seeing none, then I'm going to close the public
There
hearing.
you go.
So board, it's now time to have another discussion about the merits of the case. And this time I will start on the other side of the room and ask Ms. Huff.
I would support the nomination. I think these ruins are a wonderful link to that history of Palm Springs, that period of history at the turn of the 20th century, and the link to the artists and the writers is significant. You know, there are many holdings at the Palm Springs Historical Society on these writers and artists, as well as Carl Eitel has 800 sketches at the Palm Springs Art Museum and is kind of the forgotten desert artist. So this helps strengthen the understanding and importance of these early pioneers. So I'm very supportive.
Mr. Kaiser.
I think she said it beautifully. But also, I think it's a win-win for the owner as well. So I support the designation.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Lavoy.
I also support the designation for the reasons stated. I would also add that it be preserved and nominated as a ruin, and that that whatever methods are used to maintain and stabilize it as a ruin, that the Mills Act contract be applied to that effort. And I would also request that this is a unique designation, and that the designating sign include graphics that show both the ruin and the cabin as it was in its prime interpretive period, since the site will probably not be accessible from the public.
Okay. Mr. Hayes.
I also wholeheartedly support the nomination. This is really a magical place in Palm Springs. Being up there on that site and walking around the cabin was really amazing, because we just don't have any sites like this and any ruins like this in Palm Springs. And so to protect this is critical. And I'm happy that the owner is in support of it also. That's a really big deal. Yeah. And I completely agree with Bill. So I sat on this board when we redid the criteria for the plaques and the markers. And at the moment, they don't facilitate having any graphics on them. They're rather rigid, which at the time I supported, but I would actually wholeheartedly agree with what Bill said about, given the fact that most likely this will not be an accessible site for long, I think it's important that there be some sort of graphic, if it's possible, and change or alter on a case-by-case or allow for changes on a case-by-case basis to that marker, where we might be able to, in this case, have some sort of graphic. I think that might be a nice change if that's possible.
We can look into that.
Yeah, and that's it.
Linda.
I agree with all that's been said.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I just want to then clarify, on the page 10 of your staff report is where I've asked for a little bit of clarification from the board. And I want to just go back and reaffirm what I understand Mr. Lavoy said. And I'm going to go to the last paragraph of my discussion there, in which I said, staff recommends that if the board elects to recommend historic designation for the field cabin site, that at a minimum, the recommendation be conditioned to require the property owner to protect and maintain the ruins in its present state, and that appropriate intervention and ongoing maintenance be required to both stabilize the resource in its current state and protect it from vandalism, looting, graffiti, or other man-made damage. Is that the intent of what your condition is on this proposal?
So moved.
Yeah.
Second it.
That kind of said it all, right? Right, exactly. Well, this is a very unique property. May I comment, please, first? And I just also support my colleagues that this is a very, very unique situation. And I think it's something that that there also seems to be a concurrence on. So I think it's time now that we can create a motion.
I think Mr. Lavoy made the motion, and I think Member Huff gave the second. So if there's you want to ask if there's any further discussion?
I guess I just didn't get a chance to say what I was going to say anything, so I just had to get that in there, okay?
You did well.
So we have a first, and we have a second on the motion. So is all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries
Thank you.
7-0. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving through the agenda, there is no unfinished business today, but we definitely have new business to discuss. The first item is 4A on your agenda, the Clark Pellet and Robert Cole representing the trust, owner requesting approval to demolish a Class 3 historic site located at 561 Camino Norte. May I have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This item has been before the Historic Site Preservation Board approximately a year ago. However, at that time, no action was taken because the applicant did withdraw the application during that meeting. So what you have before you is a request by the property owners to demolish a Class 3 historic site, which is the home at 561 Camino Norte. This home has a construction date according to the Desert Sun of 1937, and the design of the original home on the site is credited to the firm of Brewster and Benedict. As noted from the building permit history that's in your application, the home has undergone a number of different changes, and all of you that have seen the home were able to walk around the house and understand it both from the exterior and the interior in terms of the various modifications that have occurred over time. The application goes into the analysis of the findings. When you're looking at the potential for a demolition of a Class 3 or Class 4 site, the board must make two significant findings: that the site is significant, historically significant, and in order to make that evaluation, I've provided for you, beginning on page 4, the evaluation of the 6 or 7 criteria involved with determining if the site is historically significant. And then on the bottom of page 5 begins the evaluation of finding 2, which is the issue of retaining sufficient historic integrity. And the qualifications of integrity are outlined there. In the material that you have in your staff report as backup, you have both a series of the building permits. There is an exhibit which you saw when you went through the home, which looks like this, which are the exhibits that help understand that portion of the home which the owner and his design team believe was original, and then an analysis of the various additions that have occurred over time. In the package, you will also find information on chain of title. In addition to the building permits, there's a series of photographs that you will find on the home. There is also, about midway through your packet, an analysis that shows, as you see on this particular exhibit, that begins to help you understand those parts of the home that they believe are the original and those that were done as many later additions. And then toward the very end are some articles that point to the information about Brewster and Benedict. I note that you've received some public comment letters today that also include information about Brewster and Benedict that you should also be considering. As we analyze this property, both earlier in the application and with the current one, and upon the site visit, staff believes that the site lacks historic significance and integrity to be considered for further or higher historic site designation. And we've made those findings and analysis in the staff report under those portions. I'm going to conclude with that statement that, as I say, we believe that there is the findings cannot be made in support of moving this particular property through a higher processing for a higher level of historic designation. And our recommendation is that the board take no further action and allow administrative processing of a demolition permit. The applicant has a representative who has brought themselves to the table. Thank you very much. I'll let you introduce yourself and make any presentation that you may have. I am available to answer any questions, and then you may take information from the applicant as you wish.
Right. So, board, questions of staff? No questions of staff? Anybody? Nope. Okay. So now that our applicant is at the table and he's ready to go, would you please state your name, please, your address,
And
Please proceed.
my name is Mark Rios. I am from the firm Rios Clemente Hill Studios. I'm a fellow in the American Institute of Architects and a fellow in the American Institute of Landscape Architects. Most importantly, I am passionate about architecture. I live in Los Angeles, but I have property here in Palm Springs and care really deeply about the community and its commitment to architecture. Our office has the opportunity to do a lot of really great, wonderful work, but I take very seriously our responsibility as stewards and guardians of great architecture. Over the past 35 years, my office has been responsible for restoring the Hollywood Bowl, the Music Center in downtown Los Angeles. We're just finishing restoring the Greek Theater. And so this commitment to be a steward is a prime goal of our office. About 2 or 3 months ago, Clark and Robert, the owners of the property, called me and asked if I would come down and look at this house. And they did so with very little information. And I think they called me because they knew I would give it an honest and a fair eye. I love the act of helping a building reveal its story. It's one of the things I'm really passionate about because I believe architecture has content. And so we began our detective work of much of the things you have in your staff report, but really talking to as many people as we could. And we found the rich sort of history of this place, which is complex and layered and complicated. And in essence, it's a book with 2 chapters. The first chapter, which you have heard about, is from 1937 and 1940. The original house was built by Brewster and Benedict. They were really significant architects that were prolific here in Palm Springs and also in the old Las Palmas area. They had both been trained by George Washington Smith in Santa Barbara. Their work can really be typified as Spanish colonial revival. And your diagram shows the original house, which was about 2,600 square feet. And I think one of the things that's really important about that original piece of architecture is that it really embodies the fit of a house to its site. Large overhangs and porches on the south exposure. You move through exterior colonnades to get to the master bedroom and bedroom suites. Really a beautiful fit between form, environment, site, view. The original house, I think you've all seen photographs of it. Here are some of the sort of images of that. But was really a wonderful example that's quite characteristic of Brewster and Benedict. Casa Adair, which is also in Old Las Palmas, is a Class 1 project. And luckily, I wish you guys had been around when our house was being changed. But this one is really beautiful, and it's great that the city has this resource that represents their pure ideology. The second chapter in this house's story started in 1959 and really continued in 1969. And it was the purchase of Benjamin Fairless, who was the CEO of U.S. Steel, a prominent guy. And he and his wife Hazel bought the house and immediately started plans to do some renovation. Their first project was to add 2 bedrooms to the front side of the house. To be really candid, those bedrooms really didn't respect the ideology or ideas of the house as far as its site placement or its construction or ventilation or view. And over the next 8 or 10 years, other additions were completed on the house. This is actually a kind of a sad story. The house was purchased in 1959. I don't believe that Mr. Fairless ever really lived in the house. He retired to his home in Pennsylvania in 1960. He had issues with his marriage. He filed for divorce in 1961, and he died on January 1st of 1962. And so he really never lived in this house. This was Hazel's house, his wife. And so Hazel continued to remodel it and change it, and she did get the assistant. She was very smart, of the best interior designer here, Mr. Elrod. And we have invoices from his office of him assisting her. And, you know, in all fairness to it, I would say that he is probably one of the most noteworthy designers of his area, right up there with Billy Haynes and other really great people. But unfortunately, their work is much more ethereal than architects' work, and it changes. And there's not a lot of specific evidence of his presence on the house. He also, through records of the invoices, show that she then bought a house in Malibu in 1962, right after his death. And so a lot of his work and his relationship with her was spent on the Malibu house. I want to point out one addition in this sort of 6 or 7 years that I think is pretty crucial. It's the front arcade. And I think a lot of you were able to go out and see the building, but this front arcade is problematic in many, many ways. And although there's some sense that it was attributed to Elrod, I think that his work is so much better than what this piece represents. And I just want to point out, and you know all of this, but at that exactly same time, in 1967, 1968, he was doing this. He was doing the Lautner House, his own house, which was purely about his aesthetic and his essence. And I would, propose that this piece, any kind of connection of his work and his spirit to this place, isn't valid, and that this is not what he wants to be remembered from. This is what he wants to be remembered by. And so the house, I would say, has not been maintained particularly well in the last 50 years. And it doesn't really represent the ideology and the spirit and the form of its current composition. If it did, we wouldn't be here today. I realize that your decision in this matter doesn't weigh at all on what my clients plan to do with this, but I think it really speaks to their character. And so I just want to mention it for a second, that they've hired Larry Booth, who is an amazing architect, to do his second house in Palm Springs here. And they're filed all the drawings, they're pursuing this actively. And Larry Booth is a peer of Hugh Jacobson and Richard Meyer and Gwathmey, a whole generation of really amazing architects. And so I believe that if this house was a piece of architecture and it was pure, we wouldn't be here. They love architecture. And I think for the city to have another Larry Booth house would be really amazing. And so in closing, I just want to ask for your support that this house does not exist in the state that it was originally intended. It does not show its spirit. It does not have a noteworthy person that lived any period of time in this house. The subsequent changes by Elrod do not support his ideology, what he was about, or his reputation. And I would like to support you to consider proceeding for the demolition of this house. Thank you very much.
Before you leave, are there any questions that the board has of the applicant? Okay. Mr. LaVoy.
Was any consideration given to the restoration of the Brewster House?
You know, I think to be complete, I should let my clients probably answer that, but in walking through the house, probably is your impression of it, the living room and the living room ceiling is really the only piece of architecture that you walk into and you say, this is kind of terrific. And the rest of the house, only like 24% of the existing house remain on the outside of it. It's a series of uncoordinated additions. And even if you look at the arches on the front and the back of the house, they're not the same. One of them is about 5.5 inches thick, and one is about 8.5 inches thick. There is not a common eye that directed and masterminded all these things that went up around it. And so the answer is no, that the house did not is not a significant piece of architecture.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So, board, now time to discuss this matter. And I think rather than just going around this time in sequence, any board member, if you would please give me your, what other comments that you would like to make. Catherine?
Mr. Chairman, I agree that the only redeeming quality of this house is the wonderful living room with the beam ceiling. You know, that's really beautiful. When I made the site visit, that was the only redeeming quality that I saw. And then in regard to, you know, Arthur Elrod, you know, he's well known as an interior designer, not an architect. And even though he did do a number of interior architectural detailing, the arches do not seem in keeping with Arthur Elrod's style or the spirit of Arthur Elrod. You know, Arthur documented his good work with photography of the interiors, and there just lacks any evidence that there was a strong hand of Arthur Elrod in these areas. So that's my comment.
And if anybody would know Arthur Elrod, it would be Catherine Huff.
Thank you.
It's your background.
Mm-hmm.
Dan.
Okay. Well, I was in the interior design business for 42 years. I have some good projects out there, and I have some bad projects out there. And this does not look like Arthur Elrod to me. Whether it's Spanish or whether it's modern, it's the quality, the proportion, the everything. So I think that this was actually very client-driven and probably client-altered from his designs. Whether he lived in the house or not doesn't really matter. But as far as Elrod's contribution to this house, I agree. I do not think that he would want to be remembered for this.
Todd.
So I agree with everything that was said. I agree with the presentation and everything else, and I have not heard anything that has led me to believe that we should allow this lot to be scraped. I think that everything that was added to this house should be allowed to be torn off this house. I think there is basically the entire original existing structure is sitting on this piece of land, and everything that was added to it could be torn out, and you could restore this house and bring it back to its glory. I think the Arthur Elrod additions are of no significance. I think they should go away, but I think given all the diagrams that we've looked at and the testimony that we've heard, that the entire original structure in its built state when it was built is there still sitting on this piece of land. And it is indeed significant, and the presentation from the owner's representative said that basically the original architects are indeed significant, and so for us to allow yet another significant piece of architecture to be scraped off its piece of land is not something that we should really be doing. And the other thing is take off all of the additions, which I at least agree with my two other board members. Add nothing to this parcel. You're left with enough option and possibility that you can leave the original structure, add to it, potentially change it, and improve it without having to scrape this lot. So that's my opinion.
Mr. Chair, I'm not focusing on Elrod, I'm focusing on Brewster and Benedict. I believe that's what we're here to talk about today, and not Elrod. Elrod did additions, okay, they can go away. I was not able to get inside the property, but I did peek through the fence around the house, and what I saw was really an impressive piece of Spanish revival. I don't know why in some parts of the report it's discussed as California Ranch. It sure didn't look like California Ranch to me at all. So to scrape this house, I'd have to hear some other really good reasons why that should happen.
Mr. Lavoy. I see you're ready.
You left me to last, thank you. When I was, I walked through this house twice, and after about a half an hour in the house, asked Mr. Lyon, did I read a report about this house?
Did you what?
Did I read a report about this house? Now, those of you who know me know that I remember almost everything I've ever seen. I can't remember your name, the date, but I remember almost every building I've ever been in and every picture I've ever seen of one. And so it's telling about both the report that I first read and the resource itself. And I found delight in everything I saw. And yes, it was quirky and it had been screwed up. And you know, one of the characteristics of Spanish colonial revival is it is not logical, it is not a Palladian villa, it is not a piece of modern architecture that has reason applied to it. They were built quite intentionally to look like an architect was not involved at all. It was craftsmen without a straight angle, without, a survey. I'm going to put a wall here at this angle because, well, I want to, and there's a rock in the way. They were quite often intentionally built to suggest that they were built over time and added onto over time. Some of them even changed styles, even though the house was built within a 2-year period. So when I look at what looks like an amazing Spanish example of Spanish colonial revival, encapsulated, to use a preservationist term, in later editions, does not, to me, disqualify it, because buildings in this style were intended to be added on to and to appear to have been added on to. So even though, and added on to in a later taste, what was seen as being sympathetic to the original. So to say that because it was added on to in a style that was, I consider, sympathetic, if not, yes, I would remodel it, but somewhat sympathetic to it, and still keeping that romantic vision of the house. I mean, I took a photograph from the pool area that's very different from any of the photographs in what was presented to us, because I saw the house very differently. I saw it as something very romantic and lovely, whereas the report presents it as something ugly and tear-downable. So the other problem I have is we as a board, have nominated Class 1 structures and allowed very unsympathetic additions to them and not declassified them. I bring Marito Place to your attention. A very modern building was added on to an English vernacular building, and there couldn't have been a greater dissonance between the original resource and the later addition, and we didn't disclassify it. We kept the classification. So I find it very difficult to accept this demolition, and would rather have a more balanced and nuanced and unbiased report in support of a nomination for this structure.
Okay, I have a couple of comments. One is, if you were to peel away the onion and to see, what is significant on the property as we're discussing, what would you be left with? Of course, we don't have the original plans, which makes it more difficult. My question is, Mr. LeBoy, would it not be possible if you were to keep those significant parts, then to still be able to have, for a homeowner to be able to have an addition onto, this is a large piece of property, which was the original intent, right, with the home that you just mentioned on Morritos. That was the original idea. So putting it out there as that being an option, would it not be possible to maintain that part that has integrity and still be able to add on?
I think it's very clear walking around that building what was original and what is new. You can tell it by the plaster texture, by how it was detailed, by the ironwork. The rafter tails they actually copied quite closely. Elements of the roof that are incompatible. It is very easy to tell the old from the new walking around this building. And yeah, it is a 1930s floor plan. It doesn't meet our current concepts of what's required for living, but we're not here to preserve the current, we're here to preserve the past and the story it tells. It could be done.
But if we were to designate it, I mean, there would still be a possibility for someone to do an addition on just to the home.
We have encouraged people to make additions.
Right, that's my point, yeah.
All kinds of architectural styles.
Yeah, that's the point that I wanted to make. It's not like you just have to live with this property in total. You remove those parts that are certainly non-contributing, but there's still opportunity for to be able to be creative and to do an addition for somebody to have a larger size property. So I think that if there are any other, those are my thoughts as well. So I can support that idea. So if there are any other board comments that you would like to make before we ask for a motion, then yes.
Mr. Chair and board, before you take your action, I want to go back to the staff report, and I just want to help you understand whatever your action may be today. Beginning on page 4, I want to go back and point to the 2 findings that if you do choose to take some other action other than to take no action, I don't know if that makes sense or not, that you have 2 findings that you will need to make, and I would like detail as you choose to make these one way or the other. That is that the Class 3 or 4 building possesses exceptional historic, architectural, archaeological, cultural, or aesthetic significance to warrant redesignation as a Class 1 or Class 2 resource. That is finding number 1. And finding number 2 is that the Class 3 or 4 building retains sufficient historic integrity relative to its original configuration, architectural features, and character. Those are the 2 findings that if you choose to not take any action, if you choose to take action, you must make those findings affirmatively.
What was the second one?
It's on the bottom of page 5, finding number 2, that the Class 3 or the Class 4 building retains sufficient historic integrity relative to its original configuration, architectural features, or character.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I would attempt to vote.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'll attempt a motion so that we reject the staff report and make the findings and the recommendation to proceed further with the nomination, making the finding one, that the Class 3 building possesses exceptional historic, architectural, and cultural or aesthetic significance to warrant designation as a Class 2 historic resource.
Class 2?
2.
Class 2.
2, in that that it does not have sufficient integrity to be a Class 1. That the building, the Class 3 building retains sufficient historical integrity relative to its original configuration, architectural features and character to qualify as a Class 2 historic resource, and would request an historic resource report in support of that finding.
I'll second the motion. To the maker of the motion, would you like to add that it's Brewster and Benedict?
Yes.
Further discussion on the motion?
I would also add that the later additions attributed to Elrod, while not entirely compatible with the original, do not represent an addition that would not be approved by this board at this time.
The
Can
maker.
you
The
repeat
second
that?
will approve.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Thank you. that the later additions attributed to Elrod do not represent, well, let's see, I qualified that, while only slightly compatible with the original, do not represent an addition in an incompatible style that would not be approved by this board at this time.
All right, I think I've got it.
Thank you.
Staff? Okay, we have a first and a second, and there any other discussions from any other member? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Don't we get a rebuttal?
5-1. Motion carries 5-1.
I beg your pardon. You would give the applicant no opportunity to respond to what's been said here before you vote? That's out of order.
This is not a public hearing item.
Well, we're the applicants. Aren't we allowed to address the board?
Mr. Rios addressed the board on your behalf. Sham process. Sham.
Seriously, we have no further opportunity to talk to you?
It's not in a public hearing format.
Mr. Chair, if you wish to entertain a further comment from the applicant, it's your prerogative to do so if you'd like to do so.
Oh, absolutely, then I think we should. I just want to be sure that it's appropriate. And if it is, please, yes, address, come to the table.
So first of all, please sit down.
Can you explain to me how you've designated this a Class 2 historic structure? Is that what you just voted on?
We haven't. That hasn't been done.
No. We have only made the recommendation to forward this for further study. We need a historic structures report in support of it. We will consider it one more time, as I understand it, before sending it to City Council. We are not a designating body, we are a recommending body. City Council would be the
So you're
designating
recommending this
body.
as a Class 2 structure to the City Council?
Yes, not
No.
quite yet.
No, not
What-
yet.
What their action is to make the motion that the city initiate a historic resources study on the property, and that upon receipt of that report, it will come back to this board for consideration of potentially a Class 2 historic designation recommendation to the city council.
And who makes the study?
We hire outside consultants to do our historic resource studies.
By we, the Palm Springs City?
The city.
City of Palm Springs?
Yes, it would be a city
At
initiated.
your cost?
It would, yes. Yes.
Okay, and how long does this process take?
The processes can take several months to complete a historic resources report.
Okay. So then the other question I have is in this discussion, Linda, I believe you noted that there were additions that you were able to see that you felt could be removed, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, that there
Okay.
were things that could be removed, and that I saw things that that spoke of good, significant historical meaning.
Okay, and so do you mind if you point out on the chart which things you saw that had historical meaning to you?
Right here, your front of your house. I was out here.
The white
in the
part
living
that's not.
area.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm just so I understand.
I was out in front here.
You
in-
were on, outside on the street looking over the
Correct.
fence?
through
and
the,
you were
not
able to
over the
see-
fence, through the hedges.
Or whatever, through the hedge. And you were able to see this historic piece?
Yes,
And that's what you're saying should be preserved?
yes, between that and the
So
pictures
everything that's
here.
in red, are you saying we can take away?
I think that we're all recommending
Yeah.
that some of that
Yes.
can be removed, and you can significantly redesign, which would come back.
Well, so, but I just want to make sure. So we can take away all the stuff in red on this plat map, and you all wouldn't object to that?
So I don't, speaking on behalf of the board, from what I heard, I don't think you're gonna have any objection whatsoever from this board taking off everything that was added, and everything that's not in white could go away in its entirety. I don't think
Correct.
I heard any objection from any of the Elrod additions, anything that's in red or orange or yellow, whatever that gold, that red and gold, you're gonna have any,
Freedom.
objection from this board taking away. It's the original structure that we are trying to maintain on the site.
Okay, and so I'm clear. Well,
Mr. Hayes, that wasn't exactly the motion I made.
yes, I understand that.
It wasn't the motion I made. And the motion I made was requesting an historic structures report to identify, without bias, those parts of the building that are significant and those that aren't. And based on the information we have from that report, then we could advise the owner in the designation, if we say it's significant and contributing, even to a class 2, then it can't be modified, or it can't, under certain conditions can be modified. It's not a simple yes or no, sir.
I understand this, but you realize we spend thousands of dollars on architectural fees to file this and to bring this to you, and then all we hear are these little responses. And it would be nice to have a dialogue to say, hey, we don't object if you want to keep, the Elrod or the Brewster and Benedict living room, we think it's a beautiful living room, okay? If that's really what we have to save, and that meets, the requirements of this board, okay, then let us design around that. Don't make us go back and try to hit the target again. This is the second time you've done this to us. And, it's very frustrating for us because, if that's the issue, is that living room, right? Then let us save the living room and let us go on and design something outside of that and move on and move out of everybody's hair. If that's what you really want to keep, then let's keep it. But don't force us to now go and wait another 6-8 months for something that you're going to come back and say, that's all we want you to keep. So maybe you could reconsider and, have a little bit different motion that says, we're instructing the applicants to, preserve this portion of the design and, submit something to the staff to then bring forward. I mean, you've all seen it, you've all been invited to go through it, and I'm sorry you weren't able to get in on Sunday. We would have been more than happy to let you come in on Sunday and see it.
And I'm
You
sorry I
just need to
didn't know
call
that.
us, But I mean, we're trying to be cooperative, and if that's really all that you want us to keep, I mean, I don't think anything else is of significance for the Benedict Brewster house. I mean, there's nothing in Stephen Keelan's letter that shows anything but that living room as Benedict and Brewster. If I understand it, I mean, I haven't seen all the Benedict and Brewster's houses, but if that's all you know, then let us keep that, but don't make us not move forward. I mean, we've been 2 years waiting for this board to decide what to do. 2 years prior to that, we looked at all these properties in Palm Springs and we rejected them because they were too historic. You know, they wanted us to buy the Kirk Douglas house, okay? They wanted us to buy Promontory Point was even shown to us, for cripe's sakes. Can you imagine had we bought that one, right? We were told this structure, even though it was on your preliminary list, was not significant. And that's why we bought it, okay? And when you ask whether or not we considered remodeling it, the reason we haven't considered remodeling this house is because we were told by everybody else that has looked at this house that it's not capable of being restored. And there's no integrity to taking this stuff and restoring it with new materials. Apparently, I mean, that's not what the statute asks us to do, is to restore a house. It asks whether or not this house has got integrity, architectural integrity. And we all admit it doesn't. So I'd really actually like you to reconsider and to move that we keep that living room that's designated as the living room and the entry structure, which is the two things in white, and let us move forward with that. So, and I don't know if my experts have anything else they'd like to add, but it would be nice to hear from you. Because I think you're the ones that know what the law is, Joe.
Well, I think that. Wait, if you want to come up and speak, you want to come up here and speak to the microphone.
Sure. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, folks. We really appreciate
Don't leave the room yet.
consideration.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Joe Roman. I'm the attorney for the owners. The one thing that I wanted to point out is that the ordinance, the entire scheme of this ordinance does not allow the board to require that a property be restored. I think you have to look at it as it is today and see whether it has architectural integrity, but you can't pressure owners into restoring property, especially when there's so little left to restore of the original Brewster and Benedict design. So I'm curious as to why the board can't simply decide whether there's integrity or not. What you seem to be doing is forcing the owners to restore this property. And that's not what this ordinance is designed to do.
I'd like to add one. We've been through this process with many cities and many projects before. One of the difficult things about this project is that literally 74% of the exterior has been changed. We only have 25% left. There are no drawings. Actually, it is impossible to restore this. It would all be guesswork and it would be fictitious. And so you could start looking at all the other houses. You could try to suppose how things might have been done. The bottom line is 75% of the exterior here is gone. There is no record of it. We have one photograph of the back porch of it. And so I'm going to make it up. And that's not what you want in this class of historic residents. There's no information. 75% the exterior is gone.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Lyon.
To help with some clarification at this point, the board has taken an action on this, and this action is appealable by the applicant under the city's municipal code. And so we will review this with the city attorney and with the applicant as to how they'd like to move forward. I don't know whether the period of appeal, the open period of appeal after which this decision is made, has to be considered first before the initiative that you requested in your motion, which to initiate a historic resources study, would have to occur. But I believe the appeal period must be held open first before we move forward with any other action under which your motion was requesting. Do you understand that?
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Lyon.
No, I don't. I mean,
there's a
you're going to force us to appeal this decision to the city council.
Yes.
That's what you're saying, right?
That's an option that you
And if the
have.
city council then decides that they don't, that this is not an historic resource, then it goes away. It drops out of the HSPB's purview completely,
That's correct.
okay? And if they uphold this, then we come back to a historic study, and then we have to do this all again. Is that where we are?
Essentially.
So we're gonna battle this at the city council level?
That's an option you have.
Well, otherwise, what's my option?
That is the option you have.
Okay. So is there a way not to have to go that route?
Mr. Lyon?
Yes.
As I understand, what was before us today was an application for demolition permit, not a restoration.
Well, that's
not
actually incorrect.
Not an addition, a demolition permit, right? Am I correct?
It was a request to demolish, Class 3.
Okay, and
You know,
that's.
I would like to
and-
correct the
and-
record,
and-
because-
I'll give you a chance to speak, but let us.
Let me finish. The public record was a request, the published public record was a request to demolish. And we are, our motion was a stay of demolition for further consideration. Now, should the applicant wish to come back with a different proposal, a restoration in part or in total, it would be a different application, am I correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Are there any other questions of the board on the process that we're looking at?
No.
Do you have other questions as the applicant?
So my recollection is that we submitted a request for a substantial renovation for this property.
In terms of the application that you have with us, with this board, it's
Yes.
a request to demolish a Class 3 historic site.
The original request was a demolition. The subsequent request was for a substantial renovation permit that would comply with the plans that we had filed with the city. And if you've categorized it as a strict demolition, then that's because you stapled it to the original application, which is in fact what the original application was, okay? But the plans on file asked for a substantial renovation. And we would certainly, if you wish us to entertain a renovation that incorporates saving this white structure that's labeled living room and the white structure that's labeled entryway, we will, take that and we will then move forward with designs on that basis. But, otherwise you're forcing us to go to the city council and get a vote, and then we have a right to demolish it completely. Is that what you're saying?
Well, your application that you have in right now for your building permit is for pretty much a full demolition. You've saved, I believe, a wall of the garage. Is
As
that
we were
correct?
told we could do under the old rules.
Right.
Then you guys changed the law, so
Right.
now we're back, and we understand that. I get we're the people we're the fly, I get that. But my question really is it possible for this group to instead consider the motion that allows us to substantially renovate the property, but preserve the structure, the structure that's called the living room in this white, and the entryway, which are the two significant pieces of the Benedict and Brewster home that remain in this property?
Mr. Lyon, I believe we cannot do that because on the agenda, the item was to demolish. Is there any way, do you want to?
No, you're
Okay.
correct.
Is there any way that we can withdraw the motion and ask the applicant to come back to us with exactly what he's saying, a remodel, and to keep parts?
I don't have my Robert's rules in front of me, so I will do my best I can on this for you. When you have an action that's been taken before the conclusion of the meeting, and is Mr. Roman here?
Yes.
Maybe you can help me a little bit on this.
Someone
There is an action under Robert's rules called a reconsideration.
Yes.
And reconsiderations may only be made, if I'm correct, by the maker of the motion or a supporter of the motion?
That's correct.
Am I-
Right.
That's
I know
correct.
I'm leaning on you unfairly here. You're not my city attorney, but I'm. So
I can withdraw my second.
Bear with me for a minute if I try to get you through this, hopefully in the correct legal way. If I'm correct, the maker of the motion may do a reconsideration of the motion during and before the conclusion of the meeting at which the action occurred. And if that is something that the maker of the motion or the second are willing to do, we still have only the action which is on the agenda. So you may not take an action on a matter that is not otherwise posted on this agenda.
Well, so then we're where we are today, so.
No,
that's it.
what we can do.
So that's fine.
Wait,
No,
wait, wait.
no,
Sir,
we get it.
don't leave
Bear
quite
with me
yet.
just a minute.
No.
So what we can do is, I can withdraw the motion, and if the seconder agrees, we then continue the motion. That is an action that prolongs.
You would continue the matter.
Continue the matter
To a date
the next-
certain.
To a date certain, and in the interval, have a discussion about, with staff, about what is now considered a demolition, which is removal of a certain percentage of the structure.
Correct.
And whether what you're proposing is in fact a demolition or not. And then we can reconsider what you want to do in the future. No, you don't want to do that?
No.
Okay. Hold on just one second.
This doesn't make any sense for us to continue.
On the legal perspective, but I'm really sorry to
Well,
impose this on you,
I
but.
mean, first of all, let's be clear, all right? If we're gonna do something, let's have a sidebar and make sure that we know what we're gonna do here, because what I hear us doing is now we're now screwed up again, and we're gonna have to wait another 16 months.
Mr. Chair,
I don't wanna.
the applicant is requesting 5 minutes of time outside of the meeting to consider what actions they would like to request the board to take.
I think it's a great idea.
Would you grant them that?
Absolutely.
And we'll
It's a great
take
idea.
Thank
we'll
you very
take a
much, Mr.
5 or
Chairman.
10 minute
Appreciate it.
recess of the
Thank you,
board at this
members of
time.
the board.
Yeah.
Public comment before you.
No. So we'll take a recess, if you will, right now, and let the applicant speak with their attorney, and then they'll come back and we'll see what direction we'd like to take with
Great
this.
idea. Okay.
this long wait, it's not. That's my point, right? Not at all.
They wanted to tear it all down and keep the fireplace.
Yeah, right. We've been down that road before.
Any luck?
Well, some, yeah, actually, yeah. So, do we have the month when they came?
It was May. I saw last year.
Sometime last year, I know.
2018.
So it's almost.
If you want to call the meeting back to order, the applicant has had time to speak with their counsel, and I'll give you a summary.
Good. Yeah. Excuse me, we'll call the meeting back to order now after our recess.
And it's 11:15. So, Mr. Chair and the board, the applicant has had an opportunity to speak with their legal counsel, and they have decided to accept the board's action with its last motion and to not further request reconsideration.
Oh.
That's correct.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for it.
Thank you.
So your action stands on that, as you just noted, and the appeal period, I'll advise the applicant if they choose to appeal, they may do so during that period, and we'll advise the board accordingly.
Okay, so then based upon that information, then we can go back to the motion's been, we have a motion, it's been seconded.
And you took a vote.
And we took a vote.
Yeah,
Right,
so that item is done.
So that item is done. We can
Yes.
move forward to the next one.
You may move forward to the next item.
I think we're all ready for it. So. Okay. So this is item 4B. The Steve Bowman and Michael Salaki.
Mr. Chair, would you speak into the mic a little bit more, please?
4B, Stephen Bauman and Michael Silvagi, owners, requesting approval to demolish a Class 4 historic site at 863 North Avenida, Palos Verdes. May I have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in your staff report, this is a project that's located in the Movie Column neighborhood, just 3 blocks west of Ruth Hardy Park. The existing building as it exists, according to the Riverside County database, is a 2,300 square foot single-family home on a roughly 14,000 square foot lot, and it was constructed originally in about 1940. As you'll note in the packet, there are a number of building permits between 61 and 2015, but the applicant was not able, nor was the city able to find any earlier building permits on this project. If you go on to page 2 of your staff report, at the top there's an image of the site plan, and at the bottom an aerial photo. That portion which you see in your staff report outlined in red is what the applicant believes is the original portion of the home, and that the other portions are the many subsequent additions that have been made over time. The applicant has also included a full chain of title in your report, and as they have noted, and we were not able to also find any people associated with the project who are individuals of any historic noteworthiness. As with the last application that you were considering, you do have 2 findings that the board would have to make in order to take action on this particular application. Number 1, that the Class 3 or 4 building possesses exceptional historic, architectural, archaeological significance to warrant redesignation to a Class 1 or 2 site. And then the second finding, of course, is that it possesses sufficient historic integrity. We've done an analysis beginning on page 3 and 4 in which we looked at the property against the various criteria for determining whether a building has historic significance, which you'll see in the middle of page 3. We do not find in reviewing this particular application that the property possesses sufficient historic significance. In looking also at the issue of finding number 2, we also did not find anything about the property that we felt from the period of significance, which was the 1940s when the original portion of the house was built, was significant in terms of the way the home is existing now. It lacks historic integrity relative to that period of time. So as noted on the final page, we are concluding that we could not make the findings in support of recommending redesignating to Class 1 or 2. Our recommendation to the board is to again take no action and allow the administrative processing of an application for demolition of this site. I believe, do we have the applicant here? Yeah. So we have individuals representing the applicant who would like to further clarify the application, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Would the applicant please come forward? If you would be so kind, state your name and your address. And
my name is Steve Bauman, and I currently reside in Chicago, Illinois.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to say thank you to the board and the city for your time today and for the opportunity to present our case. My partner, Mike, and I have always extensively remodeled every property that we purchased throughout the years and quite frankly enjoy the process. In fact, we just finished restoring a 103-year-old landmarked row house in Chicago last year. Initially, our strategy for the Palos Verdes house was to follow the same process. But unfortunately, the limitations of that approach quickly became self-evident as the more we dove into it. The numerous mismatch of additions that were made throughout the years didn't leave us much to work with. Low ceilings, lack of architectural symmetry, and poor existing floor plan presented us with no cohesive concept. In addition, the physical condition of the existing structure would make it very difficult to bring it up to current code and life safety requirements. And my knowledge gained from previous projects indicates that in a situation like this, it would be more cost-effective to build new. Lastly, there are also decaying improvements built along one of the property lines, which consisted of a casita and a storage shed, which are in disrepair and no longer permissible, which should be removed. On the historic side of it, besides the chain of title work that we provided, we contracted through our architect, John Walsh, the help of Tracy Conrad, president of the Palm Springs Historical Society, and her staff, Renee Brown, who conducted and adequately investigated the property's history, as well as they conducted a property walkthrough. They concluded that there was nothing of merit. We do recognize that there was some indication that Al Wertheimer was associated with the property. However, we could not find anything that associated with the current structure. And with that, we respectively request our application for demolition.
Board, you have questions for the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chair. There are two pictures. This one?
Mm-hmm.
And then the front of that. Is this the original portion of the house?
Where the fireplace is? Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions of the applicant?
Did you look into retaining any parts of the house and restoring part of it and working around the others, or is you totally want to?
No, initially, we did look at keeping that original structure, but it just didn't make sense for us.
Oh. Linda, anything else?
Not right now, no.
When you said didn't make sense, from the standpoint of feeling you couldn't work around it, or?
No, just that I don't think, and John my architect can probably help with this as well, but there was nothing significant about that original structure. It was almost like a cabin-like structure that was originally built. And so there's no detail in that room other than a tall ceiling. Even the fireplace is stripped.
Okay.
How long have you owned the property?
We closed in February.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, the applicant? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Board, comment time. Yes, Mr. Lavoie.
Parts of the original are a really nice example of Spanish colonial revival. And everything added on is probably not. And as much as I'd like to say keep it, I really don't think that it qualifies other than being a nice example. So therefore, I would support the take no action and kiss it goodbye. Add the photograph to the file.
And unfortunately, because there's no significant information as to who an architect would be or anything about the property, and the fact that Ms. Conrad has looked at it and has given it her blessing speaks volumes to me.
Todd?
I have a question of staff. So given what happened in our previous agenda item, I need a little bit of a primer as to what our options are. So this is an identical scenario where they are asking to essentially scrape the lot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so our only options are twofold, or two. We take no action and they scrape the lot, or we do something similar to what was done before, that we have to start at Class 2. So if we liked one portion of this and wanted to save one portion, much like the other one, and they could tear down everything else, that's not an option for us, correct?
No, you're really looking at this against two findings. The findings that you believe there's exceptional significance here that would warrant redesignating it to a higher level of historic designation, and that it has or retains sufficient integrity.
Or nothing, and we let them scrape
Or
the
if
lot.
you can't make those findings, then you would take no action. That's correct.
Thank you.
Catherine?
A comment that from studying the report, I understand that it lacks historic integrity that is original to the period. So it doesn't appear to be significant.
Right, and I have a question, actually, back to Bill. Do you think maybe would a site visit be important to confirm, or are the board comfortable with being able to look at the photos?
In that, unlike the previous one, there isn't an attribution to a significant architect or an architect at all. While it's good, it's not exceptional. So, there's part of me that would really love to keep this, but there isn't, there are many others like it. It's not exceptional. I mean, it's just good. It's not great.
So we're sort of dealing just with a period of time rather than a period of architecture.
With the period of time. I mean, and actually, Santa Barbara is filled with these, and quite often they were just built by contractors, and they don't always rise to the level of significance because there's nothing really exceptional or unusual about them. So it's just good. It's a good piece of architecture, but we can't just say everything good. I wish I could, but no.
Okay, I think the board has concluded their comments, so may I have a motion?
We don't take a motion, we would just conclude that no action would be taken?
Actually, what we would like you to do is to take an action of no motion. Sorry, a motion of no action. Let me get that in the right order.
A motion with no action.
It's been a long morning.
Okay.
Who was there second time?
So we have a first and a second. So all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you.
So the stack is narrowing down. We are 4C. This is the Eddie Edwards on behalf of WCR Holdings, DBA Avalon Paint Solutions, owner requesting a certificate of appropriateness for alterations to Harlow Haven, as AKA the Solano Court Apartments, a Class 1 historic site located at 175 East Alameda Street, also known as the Village Inn, AKA the Crawford Apartments, a Class 3 historic site and contributor to the Las Palmas Historic District. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a bit of an unusual application before you. This is a application requesting a certificate of appropriateness for alterations to a Class 1 site and to a contributing site within a historic district. In the staff report, I've referred to the Village Inn Hotel as the Crawford Apartments. Just for clarification, I tend to use whatever we've sort of established as the original name. So when I talk about the Crawford Apartments in my dialogue, it's going to be on the Village Inn. So the two parcels that you have before you, the Harlow Haven was built in 1937 as what you would think of as a classic small tourist motor court. The Crawford Apartments were built in 1945, and they were also built as a small type of motor inn that was the type that we would see commonly here in the 30s and 40s as Palm Springs really emerged with a very large tourist industry. The two parcels are quite different in their nature, and briefly, the scope of what this application or what this applicant is requesting and what their plans for this facility are is to merge the two parcels, to renovate all of the buildings that are comprised on those two parcels, both the buildings on the Harlow Haven Hotel site and the buildings that are on the Crawford Hotel site, as an assisted living facility. So the use is being proposed to change. Currently, both properties are vacant and have been vacant for a considerable length of time. So the scope of the work that you see on this particular project is, varies a bit between the two sites. When you look at the Harlow Haven, and I've got a couple of older images that I found here that are also part of your packet that are historic images of them. It is more of what you would think of a simplified Spanish colonial revival type of project. The Crawford Apartments, however, built in 1945, although the Historic Resources Report by HRG identified this as a simplified Spanish colonial revival, staff disagrees. We believe in looking at the building permit application and the information that we have in this application in the archives, that this is a building that was built as a small hotel with no particular architectural style. When you look at the original permits from 1945, it notes that it was a composition roof. We believe that the S-type clay tile that's on the roof of the Crawford Apartments is something that was added at some time later in order to give the building a bit more decorative effect. But we don't review, or we don't consider the Crawford as having any association with Spanish colonial revival architecture. The conditions at the Harlow Haven, though, are quite different, and there is a number of details on that building that do place it in that particular architectural style. The work at the Harlow Haven is primarily restorative and repair in nature. They're not proposing additions, they're not proposing demolitions. They're basically taking a facility that is very, very deteriorated and bringing it up to current standards. They're basically gutting the interiors of these buildings in order to create the necessary patient rooms, treatment rooms, offices, intake, and other types of functional spaces that they need to operate these two parcels as an assisted living facility. At the Crawford Apartments, there is a much greater degree of alteration being proposed. When you look at the photo on the top of page 5 in your staff report, it's an overall image of the Crawford Apartments. You'll note that the southern wing of that is a simple a simple single-story flat-roofed building, which we believe from building permits was done in 1952. That southern wing is essentially being demolished. In place of it, they're rebuilding that southern wing to be more patient rooms. It will have a gable roof similar to the rest of the buildings that were built in 1945, and as you see in the image on the middle of that page 5, there will be a second-story covered roof terrace that's proposed. The building that you see on the Crawford Apartments, again on page 5, if I can stay there with you for a minute, is to really, their effort is to bring this building aesthetically more in keeping with the architectural style of the Harlow Haven. So the thin wood posts that currently are upholding the front porch would be replaced with the precast concrete columns that you see in the lower images, giving it more of a Spanish colonial revival appearance. There's also minor little decorative touches that they're proposing, such as grills and so on in the gables that reflect the typical types of grills and details that one would see in a simplified Spanish colonial revival. And you see in the bottom of page 5, the area between the two parcels. Again, these parcels will be merged as part of this project into one parcel. There is a proposed archway that will allow pedestrian access between the two parcels. On the Harlow Haven site, there is an existing swimming pool that will remain, and that open space in that center courtyard will be used by the patients and the occupants of both facilities. In the open space that currently exists on the Crawford Apartments site that you see in the top image of page 5 will be a proposed new parking lot and landscaping and perimeter walls. Also, if you go on to now pages 6 and 7, you'll see some of the details that are existing at the Harlow Haven parcel and those which they are looking to do some renovation on. As you'll see in the middle of page 7, Harlow Haven has a bit more detail, both in terms of the doors and some of the detailing around rafter tails and clay tile roofs and so on. Unlike the Crawford Apartments, the Harlow Haven building from 1937 does have the two-piece barrel type clay tile roof, not the more inexpensive S-tile that you see at the Crawford Apartments. On the bottom of page 7, you can see the existing pool area and then the proposed area simply to maintain, restore, take care of overgrown landscaping, and basically bring the building up into current standards and finishes. The analysis of this a certificate of appropriateness begins then on the bottom of page 8. And there are findings again on our new ordinance that relate to the board granting a certificate of appropriateness. We've taken those findings and we've analyzed the project against them and given you our evaluation of the project. We believe in looking at this project, even though the Crawford Apartments has been identified as contributing to the Las Palmas Business Historic District, we believe that it contributes because of the type of building that it was. In other words, it was a small hotel that was typical of the type of small family-run hotels that were common during the 30s and 40s in Palm Springs. It is not significant because of its architectural style. The Harlow Haven site is different. It's significant both because of its architectural style and its simplified Spanish colonial revival, and as its typeface as a typology of building, that of a small motor court from the 30s that was very common when Palm Springs was first emerging as a tourist destination. Normally, when you look at the findings that we have in our new ordinance for considering certificates of appropriateness, the findings refer back to the character-defining features that were identified at the time of designation. Well, many of our older properties do not have that level of detail. So I've given you what I believe are the character-defining features of these sites, and that begins at the bottom of page 11 of your staff report. In the case of Harlow Haven, I've identified the two-piece barrel clay roof tiles, the decorative clay tile gable attic vents, the decorative wood doors with their distinctive peephole grill, the leading walls that form the outdoor patios at each unit, the pilasters, rafter tails, ornamental cut capitals on the wood posts, and the meandering walkways, and specifically the stone flagpole base that you'll see in one of the photos in your staff report. I will note that the stone that seems to be on those meandering pathways does not seem to be original. So in terms of the pathways as walkways through and circulation patterns through the courtyard areas, we believe they're significant, but the stone that's on those pathways appears to have been added at a later time. So the findings that you'll find for both looking at a contributing structure to a historic district as well as a Class 1 historic site, which is what Harlow Haven is, can be found in your staff report on pages 9 through 11. And what we have found in reviewing the project is that the proposed work that this applicant is looking at for the Harlow Haven site is sensitive, it's harmonious with the existing conditions, and it is not detrimental to the character-defining features that are there. In fact, as you look at the photos toward the back end of your report, you'll find that much of the character-defining features of this site are currently in very, very bad shape. There's a significant amount of deterioration and damage to the roof tile, rot on beam ends and rafter tails and so on. So the applicant is going to be working, and we've recommended a condition of approval that any work that's done at the Harlow Haven site be done in accordance with the Secretary of Interior standards as it comes to restoring and maintaining those existing character-defining features. At the Crawford Apartment site, we believe that the proposed alterations in making the two parcels more visually harmonious in their architectural style is appropriate. The building is going to be changing its use. So while we recognize that in its historic features and its historic or original use in 1945, it was a small hotel run by a small family of mom and pop, so to speak, operators. But as it moves forward in potentially going into a new life with a new use, the building topography or the building topology will stay the same in terms of its scale, but we believe it's appropriate, the proposed alterations, to give it more of an aesthetic appeal and integrate it harmoniously with the Harlow Haven site. So some of those changes that you're going to see are the replacement of the doors at the Crawford Apartments to reflect the doors of the historic Harlow Haven. They will not have that lovely little cast grille, but they will be the same basic configuration of wood panel. The windows throughout most of this complex, and both of them are mostly replacement windows. They will all need to be replaced. I'm going to have the applicant speak to a couple of windows that are left in the Harlow Haven property, specifically at the second level of the building that is referred to as the garage. It's the northwest corner. There are some steel sash windows there that are the wraparound corner steel sash windows that were often seen in the 30s and 40s, and I have asked the applicant to clarify whether those windows are able to be retained and restored, or whether they would also need to be replaced for functional reasons or operational reasons. That concludes my staff report. Again, the architect for the owner is here, and I'd like to have him come forward and address any other questions that I may not be able to answer for you. I'm also going to pass around some color and material boards that the architect has provided so that you can get a better understanding of the nature of how this project is going to go together. This is Mr. Gary Cohn, and he is the architect representing the owner who can answer any other questions. Again, our recommendation on this one is that you grant the certificate of appropriateness with the conditions that the work at the Harlow Haven be done in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards, and that the work that's done at Harlow Haven, that the Crawford Apartments is done such that it is reflective and harmonious with the work that you see in the existing details at the Harlow Haven. That concludes my staff report. I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. See, the
Mr. Chair?
applicant has come. Yes.
I have a question.
Okay, please.
Does the historic appreciation of this property include the Village Inn sign? I mean, that's a pretty unique sign.
There's been no discussion about saving the sign.
Okay.
You want it?
We can.
I'm thinking of the Palm Springs Neon Museum.
Hey, Flynn, we just need to find land.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a pretty unique sign.
It is a cool
Thank
sign.
you.
It is.
Something's wanting to happen here. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions before the applicant starts of staff?
I have questions after.
You have a question for the applicant? Okay. So, welcome. Would you please state your name and again?
My name is Gary Cohn. I'm the architect for the project. My office is 512 Via de la Valle, Solana Beach, California. Our goal with this property is to renovate the buildings for a new use, and at the same time to maintain and enhance the historic character of the property. We are rearranging the interior spaces to satisfy the new uses. And in the case of the Harlow Haven Hotel, we're maintaining as much of the original Spanish colonial revival character as we can. We're planning not to add any additions to it. We're keeping everything approximately the same. There are some relocations of windows and additions of doors, but other than that, pretty much the building will be the same as it is today. It will also be greatly improved and renovated. It's in pretty bad shape. There's a lot of distress that we believe in the walls and the structure, and we're going to try and replace it so that the life of this building will be greatly enhanced. For the Crawford Apartments, we're trying to convert this relatively nondescript building into a simplified Spanish colonial revival style. We want it also to match the other building so that the whole project will have some cohesiveness to it. We're keeping the massing of the Crawford Apartments approximately the same. The only real difference will be that the sloping gabled roof over the flat portion and the addition of the roof deck and the extension of the roof out over that. We're proposing to add stucco-covered columns, two-piece barrel tile to match the Harlow Haven buildings. We're going to match windows and doors. We're adding wrought iron railings and details such as wrought iron decorative grills. And we're hoping that we believe from an historical perspective that will greatly improve the Crawford Apartments. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Board?
Mr. Lavoy.
Mr. Chair, I'll start by saying I really like the project, but I do have some questions. And it has to do with the simplified Hispanic. Could you tell me what the inspiration of the use of these particular columns is?
The large columns that we're
Yes,
using? There are some engaged columns that you would see on the Harlow buildings. And they're not freestanding columns, but they're engaged against the building. So that was part of it, and we were trying to mimic some of that. These buildings had the covered arcades. So it had this a covered walkway, especially on Building A. And instead of using sort of what were just leftover wood columns supporting it, we wanted to do something that was more in line with Spanish character and the colonial revival character. So we felt that that was appropriate.
And if I may, Mr. Lavoy, if you look at the bottom of page 6 of your staff report, you can see those pilasters at the Harlow Haven that he's referring to, that they're using as the reference for the vocabulary of the columns on the Crawford.
Thank you. Let me get to page 6.
Very bottom of page 6.
I see them. Thank you. No other questions. I do have some comments.
No other questions?
No other questions.
Oh, no other questions from you? Okay. Any other questions from the board, staff? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Did you sign in? Yes, I did. Thank you. Excuse me. Stay around if you So, board discussion.
Mr. Chair?
Come with. Yes, Mr. Lavoy.
Well, first of all, I do think it's an appropriate improvement as proposed. Although I would request that certain modifications of it in the spirit of a simplified Spanish colonial revival aesthetic be made. One, that the column capitals more closely emulate the Doric column capitals on the older building. And if columns are used, that the beams above them be thickened. Right now, there's only appears to be a 6-inch beam, and you've got this 16-inch, 18-inch column holding up this little piece of wood. If you need a column to hold up that little piece of wood, you need a bigger piece of wood to make it credible. Or to return to the posts and zapatos that are on the property, to me are an appropriate scale and style for the building. The other is the importance not only of the cap and pan tile, but the way it's laid up and the amount of grout that was squeezed into it when it was put up, which may be problematic in that if you've got S tile, it's going to be a lot heavier. So it might be a recommendation that the property towards the south be treated more in a Monterey Spanish, which will allow you to put on a shingle roof as opposed to a tile roof, which is an entirely different set of detailing. Again, simplified Spanish, I would omit the proposed window surrounds. Just have the plaster roll into the windows. That the what are shown as sloped handrails be stepped, which is more rustic. The slope rails tend to look more modern on the buildings. And the other, that the wrought iron be simplified.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lavoy, would you clarify where you were speaking about the stepped?
There's sloped handrails shown on the stairs in plaster.
Okay.
So
step the plaster.
To step the plaster rather than the slope gives it a more historic appearance.
Thank you.
And the other is that I see bowed wrought iron it would be better to use just a very simplified vertical iron. That gives it sort of a more Mexican feel to it than a simplified Hispanic. Otherwise, I mean, that's a long list, but otherwise, I think it's a very attractive proposal and very appropriate, and very happy to see Spanish colonial revival in a district that is identified historically as originating in Spanish colonial revival.
Comment, Linda.
I think what's in front of us is a very good-looking project for a piece of property that has been deteriorating for years and years and years. And I think the proposed use is a significant addition to Palm Springs.
Any other, Todd?
I would agree. I've driven by this property countless times, and it is very quaint. And I've been wanting somebody to do something to it to save it. And so I commend you for what you've done. I love your plan. I love the use. So kudos. I support this.
Catherine.
And thank you for the excellent staff report, all detailed, really great. Studied that very carefully, and I'm too delighted with the project. It's a good, I'm so relieved too, because I've been driving by for years and years and years. So good project, I'm supportive.
Dan, any comments?
Project.
Okay. Bill, any other comments, Bill? No? I too, every time I go by this property, I'm like, pray it's made another day. So I think we are delighted to what you have come forth with us today. So I think it's time that we can make a motion. So do I have a motion on the floor to?
So I move that we accept it with the recommendations that staff has made.
I'll approve it. I'll second the motion if we can include the recommendations that Member Lavoy made.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
And those are recommendations.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. Are there any other discussions that any board member would like to make the motion? If not, I have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming. Item 4D, would you like to comment on this?
Mr. Chair, item 4D, the applicant has requested that this be continued to a date certain of your May meeting. So if we could have a motion to that effect, we will continue this as the applicant has requested to your May board meeting.
I'll make a motion to continue the item to the May meeting.
Have a second, please?
Second.
Under discussion.
Ask why?
They were unable to make this meeting.
Oh.
And it's 12 o'clock.
It's one of those very few times. It's one of those very few times I got the staff report done before I could get my applicant to the meeting, so I apologize for that.
So I have a first and a second. Any other further discussion from the board? Okay. If not, you take a vote, please. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nothing opposed?
Thank you.
Motion
Then that will
carries.
be on your agenda for your consideration at your May meeting.
Thank you very much.
Just to clarify, that will be May 14th.
Thank you. Please keep that staff report. Do not
Okay.
throw that, no, keep those. Keep those. I'm not redistributing those, so keep them.
Yeah.
That's your responsibility to lose.
Okay. Okay, gang, so discussions. Item 5A. It's finally almost here.
When is it exactly?
May.
Yeah, it's this, May of 2020. So gang, here we are. Now I can relax, I can be comfortable. I just wanted to quickly review with you, and I've written it out on registration. Those on registration, I won't have to go through each item. Just to give you a heads up, we did have a subcommittee meeting again actually yesterday, just to review all the logistics that were taken. There are quite a few things. I'd just like to call attention particularly to the times on registration for those, Linda, Vincent, Catherine, if you would please arrive at the convention center by 12:30, because registration starts at 1. And we have quite a few exhibits this year. So, which we're going to do that setup on Saturday. Except for St. Teresa's models, they always come the day of the event, but otherwise we'll be set up. Then on the workshops, I am very happy to report that Mr. Flynn has asked that the planning staff to handle the registration. And in that case, then I think this is a great opportunity for the board to greet our members, the attendees that are coming in. And if you would be there, please, by 9 o'clock. And we can have maybe 1 or 2 of us down on the lower level where registration will be. And then on the upper level, the rest of us can be, and we're welcoming everybody. I think this is a great opportunity to do it. Of course, we have on one of the presenters will be Mr. Lavoie, which we're all looking forward to what he and Mr. Price have cooked up for us. I'm sure it'll be most interesting. Just some other details on that. Also, the convention center is bringing all the tables and the chairs and doing the setup, and also working with the AB equipment. In addition to that, we will have, of course, Richard Hobel will also be there, and Toby will also be there in the beginning to see if we need him for the rest of the day. So I'm anticipating that that's going to go very nicely. Now for the fun part. This was just as of last night. We are really, I'm really pleased about this. With the symposium count that we have, and then the additions that I made, which are in addition to what's actually been signed up on the website, we're at 375 right there. So we're hitting our stride, hitting our max for this. If we need to, and we'll be prepared, we could squeeze in another 20, but we'll have those chairs available if we need them at the last minute. What's interesting is what's scheduled for this week. To round us out, Atomic Ranch is going to be doing a social media post about the event. The Board of Realtors sent out one yesterday, and it's going to be mentioned in their meeting again tomorrow morning. And also we have 1PS doing another blast out to their members. And also I'll be posting on Nextdoor. So we are in consistent with what we've been doing for the last 2 years. So I think we are definitely on the way to a sellout. And we'll be sending out reminders to all the people, all those who attended or have registered. on actually tomorrow, which really usually shakes down anybody that's changed their plans, and so that certain tours and things become available that others can, because we're creating some wait list on that. So I think it's going to be particularly with Richard and Deborah Hubble doing the production, it will have a twist for certain. We've been working on many images and ideas and things that are going to be interjected, and I think with Joan Gann being the host this year, we have a lot of new, fresh things that I think that are happening. So I look forward to seeing you all on Sunday, and we'll be having a rehearsal on Saturday, which doesn't really affect anybody here for rehearsal for the first day for anybody that wants to come. We really can't have a rehearsal for anything on the second day, but we'll be doing sound checks and getting that all set up. So if I missed anything, Mr. Fag? I thank, again, the subcommittee, and I know Vincent really wanted to be here today and to be with us yesterday, and he's still recovering from his surgery. We hope he'll be able to be with us on Sunday, and I will see you all with your shining faces then. Okay?
I have one question. On Saturday, what entrance should we use to the convention center?
The dock.
Come enter the dock?
Enter the dock, yeah. And there'll be that call box there. You just and they're going to be alerted. So we're there from 1 to 4.
And Monday's event is
At the bank.
The bank.
383 South
Palm Canyon.
It's not really a bank.
It was a bank. Coachella Valley Savings and Loan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, East Stewart Williams building, 1956. Really, just a great venue, which I'm really, how appropriate when you stop to think about it, or having that as a venue for our event. Really, really is significant. And then being able to have our after event at Spencer's in the Bougainvillea room. So I think it's going to be a really special, very, very special day. So that's all for item 5A. So 5B, Mr. Lyon? Anything?
Mr. Chair, the only thing that we know of in terms of the update on the La Plaza Theater is that they are moving into fundraising, and Councilmember Roberts is spearheading that initiative, and I will have more information for you at your May meeting.
Okay, thank you. 5C, Wellwood Murray.
And on the Wellwood Murray Library Courtyard Restoration Project, the engineering department have received approval from the City Council for additional funding for professional services in order to incorporate the changes that were recommended by the Steve Kalon report and the HSPB subcommittee. So we estimate that that will be coming back to the full board for a certificate of appropriateness in late summer.
Late summer?
Late summer, early fall.
Oh, okay.
Your board is dark in the month of August, so if we don't get the materials back from the design consultant in time to make the July meeting, we will have it on the September agenda.
Yeah. I would think, hopefully, there would have time, and this project's been on the boards for a while.
Yes, but it's a significant change with the recent scope that was incorporated.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's all under discussion. So, board members, it's your chance to have additional comments. Any comments from the board?
I have none.
LeBoy?
I really expect my historic structures reports to be unbiased, to have both the good, the bad, the ugly, and the inconvenient. Otherwise, it makes the task of making a determination very difficult. In my many years of reading them, there have only been a few occasions when I've taken an historian to task about what they didn't prepare. And usually it's by omission, not by inclusion, that what was inconvenient to whoever paid for the report has been omitted. It just makes life very difficult as an impartial evaluation of a property.
Any other comments? No? I have no other comments to add today, so with that, I will call for an adjournment.
Do you have any other
Oh,
comments?
staff report? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you'd already.
Before you do, I was not talking about staff reports, by the way.
We didn't take it that way. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Okay, I move to adjourn. Do I have a first and a second?
Do we need to adjourn to the
Okay. First and a second is the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.